You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Glad to be able to bring another show to you this week. Today's show, I want to discuss the journey of a villain. You remember in Star Wars how Anakin Skywalker had all this potential as a child, but as time progressed, he did bit by bit, he started to turn towards the dark side. He still did good. He still fought on the right side, but eventually he went all the way to the dark side. We have a situation like this going on now with the once great Jim Brown, former NFL player, Hall of Famer, social activist, was a mainstay during the Civil Rights Movement. But Jim Brown in these latter years here has made a complete about-face and has now become what I have to label as a sellout Negro. And you see a lot of this with a lot of those Civil Rights Movement era type guys. As they get older, they start to move not only to the middle, but across the aisle completely. And they start talking about, what about black on black crime? What about black respectability, politics? And they never talk about the root problem, which is white supremacy, which is what we always talk about on this show. Jim Brown recently was asked about his feelings towards Colin Kaepernick. And his feelings towards Colin Kaepernick are very interesting now because about a year ago, Jim Brown had this to say about Kaepernick. He said, along the lines of, he stood 100% behind Colin Kaepernick in his decision not to stand for the national anthem. He, however, said that not only did he stand behind him, that it was Kaepernick's right to tell the truth as he saw it, but Jim Brown also said that he would not have done that what Kaepernick did himself. So Jim Brown wouldn't have not stood for the national anthem. This was a year ago. Jim Brown's reason at the time was because of ISIS. I shit you not. His reason was because he felt that by not standing and giving honor to the national anthem, etc., you allow ISIS to take over. Now, at the same time that he said that, he also brings up the thing that all sellouts like to bring up, which is, well, what about black on black crime? He brought up respectability politics at that time a year ago as well. He said that scholars and athletes should come together, define the community, make it the cleanest, nicest, most well-educated, hardworking community there is. And when you do that, you will knock down a lot of walls. So in other words, all of the onus on black oppression is on black people. Now, you've listened to the show before. You know that I stand by black exceptionalism. I stand by black people's self-responsibility to themselves and their community to be the best that they can be times two. Because right now we are in a war. We have the war of white supremacy, the alt-rights, the neo-Nazis. We have all these folks who are actively participating in our demise, in our destruction, in our subjugation. So yes, I believe that we have a responsibility. I believe that we need to stand tall We need to be strict on ourselves, etc. But I'm never going to say that without saying that the reason why we need to do those things is because we have a system, a beast, an animal with sharp teeth that's trying to tear us apart and break us down and demolish us every single day in every facet of life that we have. Be it politics, be it the education system or the miseducation system, be it the prison system, law, even our relationships are affected by white supremacy. So I'll never speak about what black people should do without mentioning that the reason that we have to be this way, the reason why we have to be so stringent is because of the system of white supremacy. So to Jim Brown, I ask you, what about white supremacy? Now, a year later, almost exactly 1 year later, Jim Brown was asked again. Take a listen to what Jim Brown has to say.
So we're here with the great Jim Brown. Jim, break down from your perspective, I think you have a very unique perspective on this, the Colin Kaepernick situation. Whether or not you think he should be playing, what this says about the state of the NFL today. What are your views?
Well, Colin has to make up his mind whether he's truly an activist or whether he's a football player. If you try to be both in a situation, football is commercial, you have owners, you have fans, and you want to honor that if you're making that kind of money. If you have a cause, I think you should organize it, present it in a manner where it's not only you sitting on one knee, but a lot of people that is going to get behind each other and do something about it. If I ask you one question, who is calling on to follow what he's talking about? So many of us have always done it, and we're here to help anyone that wants to do it. But I would advise a young man, if you're a football player, play football. If you're going to be a real activist, use your money, use your notoriety. I didn't want to make it this long, but it does have meaning to me, and I think that I want to be in his corner, and I do think God bless him, but that's not my leadership.
You don't believe that in today's NFL you could be both activist and football player?
I think we're always an activist and a football player, but I think you have to understand there's intelligence that's involved, okay? I can't be two things at once that contradict each other. If I sign for money, then the people I sign with, they have rules and regulations. But I'm going to give you the real deal. I'm an American. I don't desecrate my flag and my national anthem. I'm not going to do anything against the flag and the national anthem. I'm going to work within those situations. But this is my country, and I'll work out the problems, but I'll do it in an intelligent manner.
Well said.
So Jim Brown just gave himself away there. He talked about if you are being paid to play, then you should be quiet because there's rules to this shit. That's what you call a sellout. You're being paid to play, so keep your mouth quiet. Then he tried to clean it up and say, well, the truth of the matter is about the flag. It's about Jim Brown disagreeing with Kaepernick's method of protesting, saying that he is disrespecting the flag and the national anthem, which is a blatant lie. Kaepernick has not desecrated the flag. He is not disrespecting any troops. And it kills me when I hear black folks in America talk about being a troop, knowing full damn well that black folks fought in wars for America and came back and were treated like dogs. Okay? But who's Jim Brown? We should touch on this a little bit. As I mentioned before, Jim Brown is a Hall of Fame former NFL running back. He was the man in his time. To his credit, He played a role in the fight for civil rights. He gave the example to athletes that you could be an athlete and be political, which is why his words nowadays, recently, is so baffling. In 1967, he held the Cleveland Summit, where he was able to pull in a lot of top athletes at the time to support Muhammad Ali, who was being taken to task for not joining the draft of the U.S. Army. And Jim Brown was able to bring together guys at the time who were big stars like Bill Russell, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was still in college at the time. At the time, he was known as Lou Alcindor, Walter Beach, Bobby Mitchell, Sid Williams, Curtis McClinton, Willie Davis, Jim Shorter, and the legendary John Wooten. They were able to bring, he played a big role in bringing those top athletes together. They supported Ali when he refused to join the army, as I mentioned. This summit, which is now being called the Cleveland Summit, which was held back in 1967, there's a popular photograph that we're going to put up for this podcast of Jim Brown in the center of this summit and all these popular athletes. This summit led to what would be known as the Black Economic Union, or the BEU, the formation of the Black Economic Union in Cleveland. What that union did for Cleveland, which is very interesting because when you think of Cleveland today, you don't really think of Cleveland being a hot spot, but the BEU created a hotbed in Cleveland for black power and black nationalists. So Jim Brown was fighting on the good side, much like Anakin Skywalker in his youth. He was fighting the good fight. He was a mainstay in the civil rights movement. In fact, he criticized Dr. King, like I would have criticized and like I do criticize Dr. King, for that nonviolence foolishness. When you are an underdog, you got to fight to win. When you are being oppressed, you have to fight your oppressor. You can't wait for your oppressor to see your suffering and have a change of heart. So I agree with Jim Brown there. All of those things I agree with. And for those things, I respected the man. But Jim Brown has taken a slow descent into crossing over onto the dark side. That makes you wonder, though, how great was Jim Brown all the time? And I looked it up, and I learned that there's an aspect of Jim Brown no one speaks about. The NFL, the commentators, civil rights people, no one talks about the dark side of Jim Brown that was showing itself ever since he was a player and during the civil rights movement. Jim Brown has been accused for beating women, raping women, at least 6 times over several decades. 3 of the charges were dropped by the women, 3 went to trial. Okay? That's at least 6 times. Now, I'm not here to convey guilt on Jim Brown, but it says a lot about his character. And I'll in fact, let me touch on some of the things. So back in 65, Jim Brown was dating an 18-year-old, I should say he met an 18-year-old, and she claimed that she was assaulted by Jim Brown in the Cleveland Howard Johnson motel. Brown claimed it was a shakedown, and a jury found him not guilty. In 1968, Eva Bond Chin, who was 22, was found semi-conscious under a second-floor balcony apartment of Jim Brown. Brown was charged with assault and intent to commit murder, felony battery on a peace officer, and obstructing justice. That's 1968. Remember, the Cleveland Summit was in 1967. Okay? 1971, battery charges were dropped for lack of witnesses after claims of beating and throwing two 22-year-old women, out of his apartment and down a flight of stairs because they refused to have a threesome with him. Let's move on. 1985, Jim Brown was charged with raping and assaulting a 33-year-old woman in his home with the help of his then girlfriend, Carol Moses, who was 23 years old. The girlfriend, who was seemingly battered, made a lesbian advance at the 33-year-old woman, and a fight ensued. Brown got in the fight, fighting the 33-year-old woman himself. Charges were dismissed by a judge due to inconsistent testimony. Things like, well, was she tied up or not? Was she penetrated or not? There was some inconsistency in her testimony. Now, as an aside note, it is common for people to, especially women who've been raped and suffer trauma, it's common for them under the stress of a trial to be inconsistent. Before I go on, you might be curious because I know a lot of you have heard me talk about Cosby's situation. The difference with Cosby's situation, why I don't go in hard on Cosby, is number one, Cosby was accused of raping white women for 40-something years in America. Don't tell me Cosby was so powerful 40, 50 years ago that white women couldn't get justice over Cosby. That's nonsense. Also, Cosby never admitted to any of these allegations being true. Whereas Jim Brown, in a memoir, I think it was in 87, somewhere there, Jim Brown had a book where he talked about slapping women around and beating women. So I'm speaking from the stance that Jim Brown himself admitted to some of the things he's done towards women. Let me continue. 1986, Jim Brown beat his then girlfriend. Charges were dropped. 1999, he was charged with 2 misdemeanors, terroristic threats and vandalism. Apparently, Jim Brown confronted his then girlfriend, which is different from the rest, by the way. He confronted her, she confronted him over his cheating. He threatened to kill her. He threatened to kill her by, I believe it was by chopping off her neck. Then he turned around, he destroyed her car with a shovel. So that's where the terroristic threat comes in, and then the vandalism of the car. She ended up recanting her statement, interestingly enough. In 2000, Jim Brown was sentenced to 6 months for not attending domestic violence counseling for the time before, in 1999, when he vandalized the car. By the way, Jim Brown is an equal opportunity ass kicker. Jim Brown has beaten dudes before, too. I remember Jim Brown beating a guy in the street over a fender bender when I was a kid. And I remember hearing that Jim Brown also beat a guy for how he placed a golf ball on a tee or something like that in a golf game. So clearly this guy has had his issues with anger management. But he will be the same guy who's talking about, well, what about black on black crime? Well, what about your black on black crime? What about your respectability? Why don't you keep a cleaner home, a tidier community around you? So there's some hypocrisy with Mr. Jim Brown, and nobody likes to speak about it. No one talks about it. Jim Brown is pushed out there as a hero to black folks, which he was being the operative word. But no one talks about the things Jim was doing throughout the years. And so today now, people like to ask Jim Brown his thoughts on things going on in the black community. And of course, he has the sellout spokesman terminology and linguistics to go along with it. But we got to start calling these people to task. You see, we have this thing, especially in the black community, and the white community preys upon it. We do respect our elders, especially if our elders did some good things. Another key civil rights guy was Andrew Young, and especially these black folks who were around and marched with Dr. King. They like to bring these guys up and to ask them what their thoughts are. And of course, they already know they have these guys in their pockets now. Because remember, a lot of these guys were living off of and eating off of the memory and legacy of Dr. King. But that only takes you so far. If you really want to build some paper in your life, you got to find another way. And as I've mentioned in Making of a Coon podcast that I did, look that one up. A lot of these guys who do the cooning and the selling out, they're doing it for opportunity. They're doing it for money. So the white supremacists, the system of white supremacy, they know that they have these guys in the pocket. And they trot them out there and let them speak and do the work of white supremacy. And then they turn to you and say, hey, look what John Lewis said. Look what Jim Brown said. Look what Pastor Darrell Scott said. These are black people. Look, listen to them. What are they saying? These black people are out here to work magic on you. See, words is magic. And because we respect our elders, it's been a long tradition of ours. It's in our DNA to respect our elders. We end up getting bad advice when these elders turn to the dark side. You don't want advice from someone who's turned. Because you're going to be thinking of them in the way you once knew them as the hero. But everything they tell you is villainy. Just before Donald Trump was elected last year, that's when they first asked Jim Brown about Kaepernick. And that's when he had some good things to say, agreeing with the fact that Kaepernick is doing what's in his right to do, which is to protest, to speak his truth. As I mentioned at the top of the show, he did say that he wouldn't have done it that way himself. And as I cited, he talked about ISIS and all this foolishness and brought up black on black crime. But when they asked him in the video that I played just now, when they asked him about Kaepernick 1 year later, just a few days ago, he sang a different tune. He talked about, he kind of intimated that, you know, he's not involved in it and who's Kaepernick looking to and bringing along, etc. So my thing is, what changed? What changed? Well, I have a little idea on what could have possibly changed. I want to play a clip for you of Jim Brown speaking on Donald Trump. Now, if you remember, after Donald Trump was elected president, Donald Trump was doing all this kind of stuff where he was pulling certain black folks that I guess his team thinks that all black people revere. Steve Harvey was one of those guys looking just foolish. And Jim Brown was another. I think Ray Lewis was in there somewhere. This Pastor Darnell Scott, all sellout motherfuckers anyway. But Jim Brown was one of the guys. And Jim Brown started to do a TV and radio tour, so to speak, after meeting with Trump. And people were asking him his thoughts about Trump. And I want to play for you some clips of Jim Brown talking about Donald Trump. So just to establish a timeline again. Kaepernick took a knee last year in August, late August. Jim Brown was asked about it. Jim Brown said he was cool with it. He wouldn't have done it himself for some foolish reasons, but he was cool with it. He thought Cap had a right to protest and speak his truth. Between then and now Jim Brown is talking about Kaepernick is desecrating the flag and the national anthem, and he's an American at the end of the day. It's about being American, blah, blah, blah. So in between those two dates, 1 year ago and a few days ago, Donald Trump was elected. Jim Brown was brought to Trump Towers to meet with Donald Trump. And here's what Jim Brown had to say after meeting with Trump.
I fell in love with him because he really talks about helping African Americans, black people, and that's why I'm here. When he goes through what he went through to become the president, he got my admiration because no one gave him a chance. You know, he's was very receptive, funny, cracked some jokes, and understood it very well, and said he was in, that he would work with us. People that go against the election are going against America. We have free elections. Everybody can vote. We fought for that. We brag about that. And we know we're going to have a winner, we're going to have a loser. So my point is, if we respect the winner and approach that person, have access to that person, and that person will look at what we are presenting, that's not too bad.
You hear what he said there? That's that old we sick master type bullshit. That's the talk of a person who's being paid. So this gentleman, Jim Brown, went from being a social activist to being a paid activist. I dare say a paid informant. His job, and people like him, their job is to go out there and prey on their own people because their people revered them for what they once were. And we have to start calling that out. We have to start pushing these people out. We got to get over this respect for elders thing. I'm from a culture where that was beaten into your head. Respect your elders, respect your elders. Meanwhile, the elders, a lot of those elders who are around were drunks, drug heads. I'm supposed to respect you when you don't respect yourself? And this is what we tell our children all the time. Now, respect is necessary, but respect is for those who have earned their respect and continue to earn their respect. Jim Brown has lost my respect. He has not done what it takes to continue earning my respect. I'm pleased that he was a driving force in the civil rights movement. I'm very pleased how he brought that summit together to support our elder now, Muhammad Ali. I'm pleased to see what he did in Cleveland with the Black Economic Union and his black nationalism. I'm pleased. However, sir, you have now crossed over to the dark side. Like Anakin Skywalker did when he walked into that temple and killed children and women and all kind of stuff. That's what you're doing now. You're killing us out here now. Because you're now going to become or have become the reference for white supremacists like Trump. And for those of you, I got some people reaching out to me about why would I call Donald Trump the commander-in-chief of white supremacy? Because he is. If you notice, when Trump spoke a day or two after the Charlottesville riots, so to speak. When Trump was talking about Antifa and the anti-protesters of the Charlottesville protests, I want you guys to go back and look at the video. Trump is throwing up the OK symbol often. Trump is throwing up that OK symbol a lot. And that OK symbol has been established. You see, when black folks were saying it, a lot of people don't want to listen, but you could go on slate.com and you could see Slate break it down. The symbolism in white supremacy. And one of those symbols, the so-called OK symbol, is when you make the OK sign, the three fingers that are up spell the W. The index and the thumb finger make the circle of the P that goes down the rest of your wrist. Trump is making that symbol all the way through. So when you, Mr. Jim Brown, go and you talk up Trump and all that kind of stuff, you're speaking up white supremacy. You're allowing them to act behind the scenes. You're fooling black people who are not in the know, who look up to guys like you, who lean on your every word. You're fooling those people into trusting the white supremacists, and that I cannot respect you for. You know who else doesn't respect Jim Brown? And interestingly enough, this person is a former football player and Hall of Famer, a black man. And I want to say, in all honesty, he is probably the strongest black man we have on television today. And I don't even know if he realizes it. But he's not a clown like Stephen A. Smith, a fat clown like Jason Whitlock. This guy is strength. There's times where on his platform he might be met with some white supremacist code, but he handles himself well. And if you don't know who I'm talking about Shannon Sharp on Fox Sports 1 with that show Undisputed with Skip Bayless and Joy, whatever her name is. Skip Bayless stays on code, by the way. If you want to see white people enacting code, Skip Bayless is the guy to watch. Now, a lot of people, and we've talked about this in past shows, a lot of people like to talk about, oh, well, you know, not all white people are racist. I say all are. You don't have to agree with me, that's fine. But all of them are, because they all lift up and support the system of white supremacy. They may not be rabid racists who are practicing their noose knot in the back room and stitching up their hood to join the Klan, but they all support the system. And Skip Bayless is a guy who supports the system of white supremacy heavy. He's on code always. He strikes me as one of those liberals a little bit, so there's a little bleeding heart in there. He'll give you a little, yeah, there's some oppression, things aren't good type stuff, but he will stick hardline to code. Watch his breakdown of the Conor McGregor Floyd Mayweather fight. And watch how well he sticks to code. He doesn't want to give it up whatsoever that Floyd just beat that white boy. He's coming with all sorts of excuses. He's talking about how the referee saved Floyd in the 8th round. That's him being on code. And the thing about being on code that's so funny is that when you see someone be heavy on code, it looks ridiculous. And white folks don't care about looking ridiculous. I've noticed this for a long time in my life. white folks, when you get them in a corner in an argument, they will stop and say, well, I don't care about the rules. And Skip Bayless does that all the time. And listen to that breakdown of the Conor McGregor fight. You'll hear Skip Bayless say it all the time. I don't care about the rules. Blah, 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 blah. Is that I'm white and I say so type of ideology. It looks goofy, it looks stupid, but that's what you have to be when you stay on code if you're trying to protect your system, if you're trying to protect your dominance. So that's what we have to do too. So sometimes Shannon Sharp meets that and you'll see him somewhat capitulate to it, but for the most part, Shannon Sharp is the toughest black man on television. And there's another guy, I can't remember his name, I think it's Ron something. He also appears on that Undisputed show quite often. He's a strong guy as well. Chris Carter, to some extent, is a strong guy as well. But Shannon Sharp is the man. He is the man. And I hope that his career isn't hurt by some of the stances that he takes. But I love his brutal honesty. And I want to play a clip from a recent Undisputed show. This is fair use, by the way. I want you to hear, if you haven't heard this already, I want you to hear Shannon break down Jim Brown's recent stance on Colin Kaepernick. Take a listen.
Football players in NFL history.
He is.
Jim Brown's social activism goes back to 1967, what he's known for as the summit, but it goes back 50 years. This guy, that's African American, that's a social activist, said what Colin Kaepernick doing is wrong. Now, Skip, this is why I'm not surprised. He was very outspoken about Dr. King and his nonviolent protest because he said nonviolence is not a movement. Dr. King thought process behind this. He says, if I'm fighting them in the manner in which they're fighting, I'm no better than they are. If I go to the streets with sticks and bats and I'm burning down and wrecking shop, what makes me better than the people that I'm fighting against?
Yep.
Skip, the cause, here's the thing. And he says protest doesn't work. Protest absolutely work. The March on Washington, Selma, Skip, what was that about? The people that were marching, they were in no position to change the law or anything about policy. It was to put pressure on the people that were in place that could change the law and change policy. They were fighting for civil rights, voting rights, fair housing rights, employment. So it did work. Frederick Douglass says, power concedes nothing without demand. Skip, do you think blacks would have progressed as far as they had if everybody just sat back and said, you know what, hey, everything's good, we all good? Skip, if what Jim Brown is saying is true, if what Colin Kaepernick is doing in 2017 is wrong, what he did in 1967 was wrong. Because what did he do, Skip? He led a protest. Muhammad Ali, as a conscious objector, said, because of my Muslim faith, this war is unholy, it's unjust, and I refuse to go.
He did.
Not only was he standing against the flag, because, hey, you remember the flag and the Veterans Day, it waves in the wind. Skip, not only did he it started an anti-war movement, and eventually it led to us getting out of the Vietnam War. Skip, I am so disappointed in Jim Brown because let me tell you what he said in 2016. 1 year ago, August, he's within his rights. He's telling the truth as he sees it. I'm with Colin 100%. What happened between August 2016 and August 2017, Skip? Now, we saw this young man, he marched up and he was in D.C. for something in January. You remember that well? Remember he went to the White House? So let me ask you a question, Skip. Maybe you can help me out. Did they just raise the flag in 2017? Or was that flag up in 2016? So I see. See, Jim had a problem with the way Dr. King approached it because he said, Dr. King was saying, give me a handout, poor black, poor black. No, Dr. King said, all I want America to do is what she said she would do on paper. That Constitution. Skip, we know now once we're born equal. From that day moving forward, unless you're of that race, you're not treated equal. So Dr. King says, okay, do what you say you was going to do on paper. Treat me equal. Give me equal opportunity. Skip. And what happens is that people will look at Jim, who's been very socially active, and how he denounces what Colin Kaepernick did, but they won't mention what Kareem Abdul-Jabbar said. They won't mention what Hank Aaron said. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is equally as important figure in American social history as Jim Brown is.
Definitely.
But here's the thing.
So is Hank Aaron.
And again, this is what makes it so concerning. Jim Brown still hadn't mentioned the cause, what led to the gesture. He's still talking about the gesture. He will not mention the cause. Oh, well, what's his cause? What's his cause? Skip. People don't know this. And he talks about you got to have a team, and he keeps using the word intelligent, like Colin Kaepernick is unintelligent, like he doesn't know what he's doing. Skip, they were trying to have the march and organize the March to Washington since 1941. That march on Washington, Dr. King gets all the credit. That march was led by Asa Philip Randolph. The guy that organized it was Bayard Rustin. Dr. King gave the speech. So it was a team effort, Skip. You don't ask Tom Brady to make tackles and sack the quarterback, do you? He's the quarterback. There's a team. It's got to be done Jim's way. And Jim doesn't like this because Jim wasn't asked to be a part of this. And that kind of rubbed him the wrong way. But I'm going to leave it at that. But Jim, I'm so disappointed in you, but I'm not surprised at you. Because I believe right now you're doing activism for pay. I want to see you denounce in the same harsh critique in terms that you did Colin Kaepernick. I want you to stand up to that president that you say that you stand support behind and denounce his comments about Charlottesville and talk about how he pardoned a sheriff that was convicted of violating people's civil rights in Arizona.
And Jim Brown won't do that. As Shannon said, and I agree with him 100%, on everything he said, or just about everything he said, I agree with. I don't agree with King's take on achieving civil rights. That thing where you go out and get your ass bust today and then suit up and boot up and go out and get your ass cut tomorrow, hoping that these folks will see your suffering and have a change of heart. I don't believe in that. I like what Frederick Douglass said. To get anything from powerful people, you have to go and take it, is essentially what he was getting at. So Jim Brown has kind of shown himself now. He's shown himself now to be not really our friend, not really our hero anymore. He's being paid to say what he says. He's being paid to take away the steam from our modern day movements. And it's a shame because Jim Brown, from what I understand, is worth about $50 million and he's in advanced stage now. You don't need to be on anyone's payroll, Jim. In fact, you should be doubling down. You should be joining Kaepernick 100% and doubling down on everything. But this is what they do with these old guys. This is what they do with the Andrew Youngs. This is what they do with Dr. King's children and nieces and all these other sellout fuckers out here. Because those of us who are weak-minded, who are uninitiated, we will hear those names, we will see those faces, and we will follow what they say. And that's what the system is hoping for you to do. To be super clear about Kaepernick. Much appreciation for Kaepernick. I'm sorry for what has happened to him career-wise so far. I hope that something does change for him. But to be honest, once the NFL is still making their money, things probably won't change. When you start to give them a hit, which is what King and them were able to achieve in Selma, when they created those economic boycotts, they got some changes. Now, of course, a lot of those changes were to pacify the people and get them back on the buses and all this kind of stuff. But some changes were made. A Civil Rights Act was created. Even though I have issues with it, something was done. You were able to show your power economically once you removed yourself from the system. So until that happens with the NFL and they start to lose out, unfortunately, Kaepernick is going to probably continue to be in the situation he is. I hope he has invested his money and did wise things so that he can continue on. I hope that he could probably move into another career outside of sports. But to be absolutely fundamentally clear, Colin Kaepernick is not desecrating the flag. He is not disrespecting the flag. I mean, you have guys out here throwing up Nazi symbols in America. Those guys are desecrating the flag. They're disrespecting the troops because those guys, the World War II vets, were the guys who went to fight against Nazism to ensure that it didn't hit the shores of America. And here you have guys here, white bread Americans, throwing up Nazi signs, rocking the alt-right haircuts and all of this old shit. That is desecrating the flag. That's desecrating and disrespecting the national anthem. All Colin Kaepernick did was exercise his constitutional rights to protest. He did it peacefully. He took a knee. And there's another thing I really dislike about white folks. You always push for black folks to be peaceful, and then when a dude does a peaceful protest, you have a problem. So I say to black folks, then fuck the peacefulness. Why be peaceful if you're still going to be criticized? It's because white folks and the system of whiteness, white supremacy, it just wants you to take your beating and be quiet. You go ahead and suffer in silence. But you're going to suffer because we're going to see to it. Just do it silently, please. Colin Kaepernick did not insult the armed forces. Like I said, there's people in America who are insulting the armed forces. All Colin Kaepernick has done is challenged America to deal with its issues. And we've been trying to challenge America to do this for decades now. That's all Colin did. And it's a shame to see that the NFL has so many sellouts, sports in general, but the NFL, boy, they have the highest number of sellouts I have seen around. Is it the CTE? Is it some brain damage that has you guys selling out so hard? And something Shannon Sharp said then, I think it's true. When you go back and talk about the 1967 Cleveland Summit, it wasn't only just Jim Brown with Ali there. There was Lou Alcindor, who later becomes Muhammad Ali. There were a bunch of, there was Lou Alcindor, who later goes on to become Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, by mistake. They don't ask Abdul-Jabbar too often his thoughts. And when they ask it and he gives his answers, they don't promote it. They don't put him on a media tour to keep regurgitating these talking points of white supremacy. They never do. So, as Malcolm X said before, you have to be careful about who they prop up in the media. There's a reason they have those people in the media. They know those people are going to speak in a way that's in line with the code that they have, which is what makes Shannon Sharp so interesting. So, I'm going to end the podcast here, but I want you guys to respond to some questions in the comment section. Should a guy like Jim Brown still be revered by the black community? Or should we throw him to the wayside now? Is there a lesson to be learned from guys like Jim Brown who were once heroes to the black community? Who are now heroes for the community that's against black people? How do we stop this from occurring? Because Jim Brown has money. So it's not just a money thing, is it? Is it an old age thing? Is it a fear of death? What do you think it's the reason for all these sellouts, especially guys who were active in civil rights, and now they sell out the black community with no problem? I want to thank you all very much for listening to my podcast, for your comments in the comment section on YouTube when we post them there. I want to encourage you guys to like us on Facebook and to join the conversation. I find that in a lot of these other Facebook groups, there's a lot of low-energy individuals who are just talking foolishness all day, who are trolling. But those posts get hundreds of likes, hundreds of comments. And in the Bitter Medicine Podcast Facebook page, for example, we get like 4 or 5 regular participants. I'd like to increase that. I think we should dialogue more. I think we should have more think tanks and more questions of the day type thing that people respond to, and let's build something. Because this is why we have guys like Jim Brown and them. We don't have the answer for Jim Brown and them. We're not thinking about Jim Brown and them and the damage that they're causing. So I'd like you guys, I beg of you, please join us in discussion on the page. Also, please head over to the KWAZ radio page. New shows are coming on KWAZ radio. There's a love relationship advice show coming from a black empowerment standpoint. Please look out for that. Until next time, thank you for listening to the Better Medicine Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.